as air transportation flourished in the 21st century. When you buy a plane ticket online, there might be a small checkbox at the bottom that says, offset your carbon footprint for just $3. Airlines, oil companies, tech giants, they all claim to be carbon neutral. But what does that actually mean in the real world? This is episode 6 of Carbon Narratives, the carbon market con. Let's start with the basics. A carbon offset is essentially a permit to pollute. A company calculates how much CO2 it emits and pays someone else to absorb or prevent that same amount of carbon emissions elsewhere. That could be a forest in Brazil, a wind farms in Morocco, or methane capture projects in rural Ghana. On climate reports, the balancing works out. 1 million tons emitted, 1 million tons offset, which gives net zero. The voluntary carbon market, or VCM, allows private entities to voluntarily buy or sell carbon credits to meet climate goals outside regulatory mandates. It was valued at nearly $2 billion in 2021 and projected to grow $50 billion by 2030. Carbon offsets have become one of the fastest growing financial instruments in the world. But that math almost never works out in real life. In 2023, an investigation by The Guardian, DIZET, and Source Material analyzed the rainforest carbon credits approved by Verra, the world's largest carbon offset certifier. Their finding was that more than 90% of those credits were essentially worthless. The forests they claimed to protect were actually never at risk of deforestation. Most projects were fictional. Companies paid billions of dollars to claim they were protecting forests that weren't threatened. However, emissions keep rising, global warming continues to exacerbate. This is the core of the carbon market con. It's not just a technical accounting problem, it's a structural one. The entire market is built on the idea that carbon reduction somewhere can substitute for carbon reduction everywhere. But the atmosphere does not work that way. A ton of CO2 released in Los Angeles is not cancelled out by a tree planted in Amazon, especially when trees may actually be cut down in 20 years, or die in a wildfire made worse by the very emission that it was supposed to offset. The projected dream doesn't satisfy the reality. Here's where this becomes a climate justice issue and not just an accounting one. Where does offset projects actually happen? Overwhelmingly in the global south, in the developing nations, rainforests in Amazon, community land in Kenya, rural farmland in Cambodia. Hundreds of examples prove the unsustainability of such a project. The companies buying those credits are headquartered in the United States, Europe, or Australia. And the communities whose land become an offset project often have no say in this decision. The Kariba REDD Plus project in Zimbabwe is one of the most documented examples of this. It was one of the largest carbon offset projects in the world. It was used by Gucci, Volkswagen, and Nestle to claim climate responsibility. Reporting by Climate Home News and other outlets found that roughly $100 million in credits sold through the projects. 86% of the revenues were captured by the Swiss company South Pole and its local partners. The communities living inside that project area, whose land, farming practice, and firewood collections were restricted, were the vulnerable. Credits that communities received a fraction of euro were being sold to global brands for up to €20 each. As The Guardian reported, there are no legal or contractual obligations requiring companies to sell these kind of offsets to share revenues, and those revenues are often kept entirely secret by project developers. The people whose lives are mostly restricted by these kind of projects saw almost nothing. Meanwhile, the corporations that brought the credits post their net zero announcement online. There's another issue the carbon market does not like to talk about: permanence. A forest that absorbs carbon for 50 years can burn in a single wildfire season. The 2020 and 2021 wildfire seasons alone likely depleted 95% of the fire risk credits that were supposed to cover the California's forest carbon offset buffer pool for 100 years, according to a peer-reviewed study published in Frontiers in Forest and Global Change. The carbon those trees were supposed to store permanently has released back into the atmosphere in weeks, and the companies that bought those credits still count them as offsets. Their emissions are still neutralized on the paper. None of these means that forests aren't worth protecting or that carbon finance can play no role in climate solutions. Indigenous land stewardship is generally one of the most effective tools we have for long-term carbon storage. However, if people are just using nature as an excuse not to cut emission at the source, then the entire system is corrupted. A carbon offset should be the last resort after a company has already reduced what it possibly can. Instead, it has become the first resort, as it's the easiest pathway to claim progress without making any. We all know that efficiency is the key measurement standard nowadays for any projects or constructions. But challenging this narrative is important to prevent blind utilitarian approaches. Real solutions require actually reducing emissions, not exporting them elsewhere and claiming innocence. They require binding regulations that evaluates true progress and honest accounting that reflects what the science actually shows about forest permanence in a warming world. The carbon offset market was supposed to be the bridge, a way to buy more time while the world transitioned into clean energy. Instead, it's becoming a permission slip. It's a way for the world's largest carbon emitters to keep polluting while presenting a green profile to shareholders and consumers. The communities in Zimbabwe, Kenya, and the Amazon did not cause the crisis, but their lands and livelihoods are being used to cover the emissions of corporations thousands of miles away, with almost none of the financial benefits flowing back to them. Net zero should not mean zero accountability. This is Jason, and you've been listening to Carbon Narratives.